Hello and welcome to the RealTime Fantasy Sports Show. I'm Jeff Paur, senior writer with RealTime Fantasy Sports, and on today's show, I'm going to give you my starts, sits, and sleepers for Week 5 of the fantasy football season. I like to keep myself honest and let you know what I did from week to week. Every week of the season, I had gone 14-12 until last week, and unfortunately, I went the wrong way. I went 13-13 last week, so we went 500 last week. Got to do better than that. Overall record for the season is 55-49. So hopefully I get going a little bit here in the coming weeks, and I'll try to get that better for everybody out there. But over 500 is pretty good. I'm trying to give you some players that aren't your surefire starts. So that's what makes it a little tough, but that's what you got to do. And hopefully I can do better for you this week with my starts, sits, and sleepers. And just a reminder before we get into all the starts, sits, and sleepers, the buys start this week. We have Atlanta, Chicago, Green Bay, and Pittsburgh on a bye. So some good fantasy players are off this week. Plan accordingly. And as I always say as well is plan ahead. You know when these players are going to be on a bye, especially the big name players. Plan your bye weeks ahead of time. You can get some players to fill those starting spots for your big name players when they're off. All right, let's look at the start, sits, and sleepers. We start with QB. I'm going to give you 3 starts, 3 sits, and a sleeper at each of the key positions. And then at tight end, I'm going to give you 2 starts, 2 sits, and a sleeper there because not quite deep as a position as the other ones. We'll start with QB. My first start is Jared Goff of the Lions. He's really playing some good football right now. I think the Lions offense is really starting to come together. Goff had multiple touchdown passes last week against a really good Browns defense. He had that 5 touchdown performance in week 2 against the Bears. We know he can have a huge game any given week, and I think that could come this week against the Bengals. They allow the 7th most fantasy points of quarterbacks. They allowed more than 500 total yards of offense last week. I think the Lions are going to put up a ton of points in this game. Goff is a great start for fantasy teams. My next start at quarterback is Daniel Jones of the Colts. He did not have a great game last week, but he still threw for 262 yards. He had a touchdown, and that was against a good Rams defense on the road. I still believe in Jones at this point. Remember, he started the year with 26 plus fantasy points each of his first 2 games. He gets the Raiders in week 5. They have allowed some big passing games this season and at least 20 points 3 straight games. I think the Colts offense gets it going and Jones has a solid week 5. My last start at QB is Dak Prescott of the Cowboys. He looked fantastic last week against a very good Packers defense. He absolutely dismantled them without CeeDee Lamb, his top target at receiver. He had a 300-yard, 3-touchdown game. He has 26 plus fantasy points 2 of his last 3 games. And he gets the Jets this week. They've allowed the 13th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. I think Prescott keeps it rolling. He has another game with 20 plus fantasy points in week 5. All right, let's look at my sits for week 5 at QB, and it starts with Trevor Lawrence of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jaguars, they're winning games, but Lawrence is not helping fantasy teams right now. He has less than 14 fantasy points 3 of 4 games. He just has produced very little. He gets the Chiefs this week. They've allowed fewer than 200 passing yards 3 straight games, including games against the Eagles and Ravens, 2 of the top offenses in football. Now the Jags have to play the Chiefs in this matchup, and I think Lawrence is going to struggle once again to help most fantasy teams. My next sit is Matthew Stafford of the Rams. He's another guy. He's playing well, but he does have 2 games with fewer than 17 fantasy points. I think he's still more of a matchup play at this point. I'm not just going to start it and forget it with Stafford. I am encouraged that his back injury has not bothered him to start the season. We're all worried about that, but his fantasy play has been a little bit up and down. So I'm not using him unless it's a great matchup. And this week against San Francisco, not a good one for him. They've allowed the 4th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. They have yet to allow 200 passing yards in a single game this season. So I would go with other options at QB. My last sit is Carson Wentz of Minnesota. He threw for 350 yards last week. He has multiple scores 2 straight games. He has looked pretty good in this Vikings offense and provided a spark to the passing game for him, but I'm not just throwing him in my lineup. I don't trust him. He's still a bit of a statue back there at quarterback. He doesn't move around very well. And against Cleveland this week, I don't think that's good news for this offense. Cleveland can absolutely get after the quarterback. They allow the 7th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks as well. I'm just avoiding Wentz despite his big game last week. My sleeper at QB, and that is CJ Stroud of the Houston Texans. He's finally shown some signs of life. He did so last week, top 20 fantasy points for the first time all season. He was 22 of 28 for 233 yards and 2 touchdowns without a turnover. And now he gets Baltimore this week. They are an absolute mess defensively. They allow the third most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes just had a 4 touchdown performance against them last week. I think Stroud has another good game this week. You can start to trust him a little bit at this point with some of these favorable matchups. Let's look at the running back position now. We'll go with the starts, as always, to start the running back position. And my first one's Alvin Kamara of the Saints. He hasn't really been off the charts this year, but he's getting touches and producing. He has at least 11 fantasy points, 3 or 4 games. He has 19 or more touches, 3 straight games. So the volume is huge. I know Kendra Miller looked good that last week, and he could eventually emerge as the starter if they end up trading Kamara, which is possible. But for now, Kamara's still the starter. He's still getting touches. They like to run the ball. I trust him this week, especially against New York. The Giants have allowed the 5th most fantasy points for running backs, 100+ rushing yards in every game this year. I think Kamara is going to have a big performance in week 5. My next start at running back is David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. He had a game to forget last week. You're probably really down on him. He ran 9 times for just 12 yards. That was against a great Browns defense, which has absolutely dominated running backs this year. Montgomery had scores 2 straight games before last week. He gets the Bengals. They're terrible, as I mentioned earlier with my golf suggestion. I believe in Montgomery this week. I think they're going to roll up the points in this matchup. I'm getting all my lines involved, including Montgomery against this Bengals team that allowed the 2nd most fantasy points of running backs. They're just awful right now. I think Montgomery rebounds in a big way this week. My sits at running back. My first one is Jordan Mason of the Minnesota Vikings. He has played well in a starting role since taking over for the injured Aaron Jones, but he ran 16 times for just 57 yards last week. It was a kind of a ho-hum performance for him, and he has still not caught the ball a ton out of the backfield in a starting role, which is a little bit of a concern for me. And now he gets that Browns defense I was just talking about that shut down Montgomery last week. They have dominated fantasy backs this year. They have completely shut down fantasy backs nearly every game this year. They allow the 2nd fewest fantasy points of running backs, less than 100 rushing yards, all but a game. I think Mason's going to struggle here. I would avoid him. My next sit at running back is Nick Chubb of the Houston Texans. He remains a starter for now, but Woody Marks, he's knocking on the door, ready to take that job. I think it's going to be any day now that Marks takes over and becomes the lead back because Chubb just hasn't done a whole lot. He has at least 12 carries, all but a game this year, but his season high in rushing is 60 yards. I just don't think he looks very good right now. And you're thinking he has a great matchup this week, but I would still avoid him even with that good matchup. I think Marks is going to end up taking over this backfield, and Chubb is a guy I just don't trust despite a favorable matchup in week 5. My next sit is Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. I know, really hard to sit somebody that you use such a high draft pick on this year. You probably took him in the beginning of the 2nd round. Some people even took him in the 1st round this year, and he's been absolutely horrible. I hate to say it. He is not top 50 rushing yards in a game. Bengals offense is horrible. Jake Browning is not the answer at quarterback, unfortunately. The best game of the season for Brown this year is 13.1 fantasy points. Now he gets the Lions. They've allowed fewer than 90 rushing yards, 3 or 4 games. If you have better options, I really would consider benching Brown in week 5. My sleeper at running back is Ollie Gordon of the Miami Dolphins. Gordon played a season high 26% of the snaps last week. That was the good news. The bad news, he ran 6 times for just 10 yards. But he got playing time and he got carries once again, which has kind of been the theme for him lately. And I think this Miami offense could be a lot more run heavy going forward with Tyreek Hill injured. And now he gets the Panthers this week. They really struggled defensively in their game last week. I think Miami's going to roll up some points and have some big time success on the ground. So I would consider Gordon as a flex play in week 5. Let's look at the receiver position now. My 3 starts. My first one is Michael Pittman of the Colts. He had a season high 10 targets last week. He found the end zone once again, having touchdowns 3 of 4 games this year. He has at least 15 points fantasy points 3 of those games as well. Now he gets to Las Vegas. They allow the third most fantasy points to receivers and have struggled to stop the top receiver on opposing teams. I think Pittman keeps it rolling. He finds the end zone once again. My next start is Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills. There was thought that Keon Coleman was going to take over and emerge as the go-to target for the Bills. Guess what? That's not happening. Keon Coleman had a great first game. He's done next to nothing since then. Shakir remains the favorite target of Josh Allen, in my opinion. He has at least 12 fantasy points, 3 or 4 games. He has touchdowns 2 straight games. He gets the Patriots this week. They allow the 12th most fantasy points to receivers. I think this could be a high-scoring game. I like Shakir to keep it going and have another double-digit fantasy point game. My last start at receiver is Garrett Wilson of the Jets. I know the Jets might not throw the ball much, but when they do, they throw it to Wilson, and he is producing. He has 20-plus fantasy points, 3 or 4 games, and a run-first offense. His numbers have been absolutely outstanding. I can just imagine what he would do in an offense that threw the ball a lot more and had a much better throwing quarterback on their team. But for now, he's dealing with Justin Fields and the run-first Jets offense. Doesn't matter. He's producing. He's a must start every week. He gets the Cowboys this week. They allow the most fantasy points to receivers on the season and at least 298 passing yards, 3 straight games. So while the Jets might not have a ton of success throwing the ball normally, they could this week. And I think Wilson goes off for New York. My sits at receiver. My first one is Chris Godwin of the Bucs. Came back last week from that gruesome ankle injury, and he played a lot. He actually played 81% of the snaps. He got a full workload, came out of the game just fine, but he did next to nothing in the game. I think it might take him a little time before he starts finding his groove. Again, this was an awful injury, his ankle injury, a dislocated ankle he suffered last year. And it might take him some time to get up to speed and be the Chris Godwin we're accustomed to. So until that happens, until I start seeing him produce on the field, I'm sitting him, especially this week against Seattle. They allow the 3rd fewest fantasy points to receivers. My next sit is another guy that's just off to an awful start this year. That's Ladd McConkey of the Chargers. I know it's hard to bench him, just like Chase Brown, use high draft capital on him. But McConkey's not playing. The numbers don't lie. He has yet to be targeted double-digit times in a single game this year. He has failed to hit double-digit fantasy points 3 straight games. He hasn't hit 50 yards in any of those games. I just think he's a scary play for fantasy teams right now. Keenan Allen signing with this team right before the start of the year was really a bummer for McConkey because I think Allen's getting a lot of his targets. So I'm worried about McConkey right now. I might just avoid him until he really gets it going. My last sit is Malik Washington of Miami. A lot of people might be thinking Tyreek Hill's hurt. Malik Washington's going to be playing a lot more, but I just don't see it. He's more of the slot receiver. I don't see him playing a lot on the outside, and he actually played a season-low 48% of the snaps last week, and Hill was hurt fairly early in that game. So you would have thought Washington's playing time was going to go up if he was going to take Hill's role. I don't think he is. I still think he's that slot receiver. He'll get some weekly touches. He's more of a spot play, and he gets the Panthers this week. They've been really good against the pass. They allow the 2nd fewest fantasy points to receivers. I would avoid Washington here, even with Hill out for the season. My sleeper at receiver is Kendrick Bourne of the San Francisco 49ers. 49ers are all beat up at receiver. Ricky Pearsall's hurt. Juwan Jennings is banged up. I don't know who's left to catch passes for this team. It's Bourne. That's the guy who's left. That's if you're wondering who it is. He played 67% of the snaps last week, 72% the previous game. He has at least 3 receptions, 2 of 3 games. He gets the Rams. They allow the 10th most fantasy points to receivers. Someone's got to catch passes here, and I think it could be Bourne. So if you're looking for a desperation play at receiver, I might give Bourne a shot here. He can end up surprising in week 5. Let's look at the tight end position now. I'll give you 2 starts, 2 sits, and a sleeper at tight end. My first one is Sam Laporta of Detroit. He's been up and down this year. He's had just one big game, and that was week 1, but he does have at least 4 targets every game. So he is getting some looks, and I think he could get more this week against Cincinnati. It's obvious I'm targeting all Detroit Lions players in this game. I've mentioned a couple already. Bengals are a mess defensively, though, and they also allow the 5th most fantasy points at tight ends. I'm getting all Lions involved here. I think Laporta could have a really good showing, maybe his best of the season in week 5. My next start at tight end is Dalton Kincaid of the Buffalo Bills. He has touchdowns 3 or 4 games. He's been a top red zone target for this offense. I think he's finally going to have that breakout season we've been waiting for. He gets the Patriots this week. They allow the 9th most fantasy points to tight ends. I mentioned it earlier. I think this game could be high scoring as well. I look for Kincaid to find the end zone again, so I think he's going to have another big game in week 5. My sits at tight end. My first one is Hunter Henry of the New England Patriots. He's really doing well in the Patriots' new offense, but he hasn't been immune to the down game. He has fewer than 40 yards 2 of his last 3 games. I think he can be a little TD dependent at times, and I'm not sure he's going to post big numbers against a Bills team that's actually been really good against a tight end. I know I said I like this matchup to be fairly high scoring, but I'm just not sure Henry is going to be a big factor in this game. Bills have allowed the 2nd fewest fantasy points to tight ends. Could be one of those down weeks for Henry. My next sit is Evan Ingram of the Denver Broncos. He was more involved last week. He had a season-high 7 targets. He caught just 4 passes for 29 yards, though. He just doesn't seem to be quite on the same page with Bo Nix just yet. I think that could still come, but he has less than 30 yards all 3 games he has played this year. Now he gets the Eagles this week. They've allowed the 3rd fewest fantasy points at tight ends. I'm not playing Ingram until I see him really start producing on the field, so I would avoid him in this matchup. All right, my sleeper at tight end, my last pick of the week, and it's Tommy Tremble of the Carolina Panthers. Tremble had a season-high 8 targets last week. He caught 5 passes for 42 yards and a touchdown. He looked good in a starting role for the Panthers with Jatavion Sanders hurt, and Carolina needs somebody to catch passes besides Ted McMillan, and it could be Tremble being that guy. The Dolphins also have struggled to stop the tight end. That's who they play this week. They've allowed the 3rd most fantasy points at tight ends. So I think Tremble could end up being a good streaming play for fantasy owners. All right, those are my start, sits, and sleepers for week 5 of the fantasy football season. Good luck this week. Good luck navigating those buys. Hope you come out on top, win all your games. This has been Jeff Paur for RealTime Fantasy Sports.